Oh boy. When I wake up each day, I feel so weary. Try to face the world, but it's so dreary. But I found that special thing that makes me cheery. Time to do music theory. Music theory. Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Friday, April 10 edition of Online Voice Leading. So far, I think things are going pretty well. We've gotten through our first test, and we're starting Unit 12 now, and hopefully we're all adjusting to what the new normal for the rest of this semester is going to be. I hope y'all are keeping yourselves busy and healthy and sane. And in case you're wondering about me, am I keeping myself busy and healthy and sane? Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. If you're wondering what I do with myself all the time, I will tell you that I have done something very exciting about our book. I realized what was missing. The thing that was missing from the music theory book is it had no cool cover art. So I drew me a little monster to put on the cover of the book. It's already a 10 times better book than it was now. Wouldn't you agree? But anyway, let's move on. As you may recall, the other day we started talking about seventh chords and how we work with seventh chords, and we talked in particular about how to part write dominant seventh chords or 5/7 chords. Today, we're going to continue to just talk about how to part write dominant seventh chords, but we're going to make one change. On our earlier lesson, we only talked about how to handle dominant seventh chords in root position. Today we're going to talk about expanding our handling of dominant chords to being able to part write for 5/7 chords in root position and all 3 inversions. I think you'll find it rather straightforward and easy, so let's begin this very short lesson. So here's a chord progression from your book that contains just 1 chords and 5/7 chords. But you'll notice the 5/7 chords happen in different inversions. We have them happening in second inversion, third inversion, root position, and then first inversion if you're going from left to right. In all instances with those 5/7 chords, the thing that's most important part writing wise occurs. And that thing is the 7th of the chord goes down by step to a note in the next chord. Now the 7th of an A, C sharp, E, G chord is the G. And if you look at all those G's that are marked with blue arrows there, you'll see that in each case those G's move down to the F sharp that's a step lower in the D major chord that comes next. So whenever this happens, it gives a very nice standard sounding chord progression like so. Everything there works perfectly fine and dandy. And it works fine and dandy to large part because that thing about 7ths of chords resolving down by step is being honored. That's a very, very important part writing thing to watch for. The red lines are showing the leading tones, which in D major is C sharp, and how in most cases here, in fact in all cases here, the leading tone of the D major scale, which is C sharp, fulfills its tendency to move up a step to the tonic. Now sometimes it's really important for the leading tone to go up by step to the tonic, but not always, and you may have figured that out already. Because of course I know you all are sitting out there thinking, surely not every leading tone ever written has gone up by half step to the tonic. And you're right, sometimes leading tones don't need to go up to the tonic, and we get on with our lives just fine. This second chord progression here in the key of F minor actually illustrates how that works. And the basic thing about leading tones is this. The tendency of a leading tone is to move up a half step to the tonic. The times when it's really important for the leading tone to fulfill that tendency are times when the leading tone is very noticeable to us, which would be a time when the leading tone happens in the highest or lowest voice. So in this progression, the leading tone of the scale, E natural, actually happens twice. It happens in the soprano voice at the end of the first measure, and then it happens in the tenor voice at the end of the second measure. And if you'll look, you'll notice that the leading tone in the soprano voice moves up a half step because it's in the soprano voice and it's the highest thing and our ears latch onto that. Whenever it's the highest or the lowest thing, that's when it's easier for our ears to hear it. But if you look in the second measure, you'll notice the chord that has E in it there, that has the E hidden in the middle of the chord in the tenor voice, that E doesn't resolve up a half step to the tonic in the next chord. Instead, it skips down a third, and we've got a complete root third and fifth triad at the very ending here. And we got that because we didn't resolve our leading tone. Now let me play the progression as it's written, and you can give it a listen here. Here it is. And let me play it one more time. Everything there works fine. And you probably can't tell that in that last pair of chords that the leading tone, which is the E, is not resolving up a half step, but is instead jumping down. Here's what it sounds like if that leading tone does resolve up a half step. And here's what it sounds like if it doesn't. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of us don't hear much, if any, difference, especially given that you're hearing this recorded on an out-of-tune piano and not the greatest recording quality. But I can guarantee you, if I took that first leading tone in the first measure and didn't resolve it up a half step, you might notice it. Here are the first four chords as they're written. And now let's do the same thing we did at the ending. Let's take that E in the soprano, and instead of going up to the F, let's jump down to the C. Listen again, what's written? And now, not resolving the leading tone. That's a little frustrating, isn't it? You've got that 5-7 chord, that leading tone on top, you know where it wants to go, and then instead, so outer voice leading tones in the soprano and the bass voice need to resolve up a step. When they're in an inner voice, in the alto or the tenor, not so much. And that not resolving the leading tone is what some books refer to as a frustrated leading tone. But when they're in the inner voice, it doesn't matter. And in fact, if we start looking at some of the cadences real composers wrote with leading tones, we'll notice that a lot of times whenever they had a leading tone in the alto or the tenor voice, they didn't resolve it up a half step. They let it move down by small skips so that they could have a complete chord. Bach is notorious for this. So that's something for us to watch for as we go forward. And guess what? That's really all I want to cover today. I want to cover that, and I wanted to have you all do assignment 2 in Unit 12 for homework. But I also think that rather than taking up that homework, what if we just did the homework right here, right now in this video? And there are two ways you can do this. You can either pause the video or close the video and come back to it, and you can go do the homework, and then you can listen to this next part and compare the answers you get to the answers I'm going to show you. Or if you want, you can work through it right now along with this. But I am going to do all of Unit 12, Assignment 2, and we're going to go through it very slowly and methodically. It will not be the most exciting thing you listen to on the internet today. I really hope it won't, at least. But hopefully you'll find it to be useful. So let's just look at some of the homework here and figure out how we'd work through these. And I'm going to talk you through it slowly, step by step. And we'll take everything we've learned about 5/7 chords, resolving the 7th down, resolving the leading tone up, especially when it's in the soprano or the bass voice, and we'll make that work in some actual musical examples. So here we go. Okay, so here's the beginning of the homework. It's sort of like the last one we did. Everything is a 5/7 chord, and I want you to resolve it to a 1 chord. The only thing that's different this time is not all the 5/7 chords are going to be in root position, and you don't necessarily have to always resolve your leading tones up a step. It's probably not going to hurt if you do, but let's practice handling some inverted 5/7 chords. So the first thing we need to do for all of these is look at the key signature and figure out, am I looking at a minor key example or a major key example? So with that first one there, it's got 2 sharps, so it's either D major or B minor. And we can quickly figure it out by looking at the chord that's given. The chord that's given is an F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E chord. So we need to be in B minor, not D major. And there are 2 ways to know that. One way is this. That A sharp wouldn't really be a very useful note to us in D major. But in the key of B minor, that A sharp would be totally useful because it would be the raised 7th scale degree, the leading tone. And the other way we can figure out this should be done in B minor and not D major is this. Since we know the first chord is going to be a 5/7 chord, once we figure out the chord's root is F sharp, all we've got to do is figure out, so which key has F sharp as its 5th note? Is it D or is it B? And you're like, well, it's going to have to be B. That's where F sharp's the 5th note. So we're in B minor, and there's an F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E chord, which means it's in first inversion. So what we're really looking at here is a 5/6/5 chord, and we want to resolve it to a 1 chord. And since we're dealing with 7th chords, let's always make our first thing we're going to deal with resolving the 7th of the chord. So the 7th of the F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E chord is that E in the alto voice. And what do 7ths do? They resolve down by a step. So let's do that first. Let's take that E and resolve it down by step to a D. And that D is going to be part of our B minor chord. Then something you want to do is you want to look for the leading tone that's in your 5/7 chord. And remember, in B minor, the leading tone is A sharp. Now sometimes you'll have a choice about resolving the leading tone, and sometimes you'll not have a choice. You'll need to definitely resolve it. This is one of those times where you need to definitely resolve it, because if you look at the A sharp, it's in the bass. That's an outer voice. That's the lowest voice, so it's going to stick out. So because of that, our ear's going to hear that A sharp and want it to resolve, so make sure you resolve that A sharp up a half step to B, because that's the leading tone. And then with the other 2 voices, we don't need to be as picky. We just need to do stuff that's not going to make a mess setting up that last B, D, F sharp chord. So the thing that would make the most sense with the soprano there is to keep it on F sharp. Hold that common tone over. And then with the alto voice, excuse me, not the alto voice, the tenor voice, it makes sense to just move it by step to something in the B, D, F sharp chord. And I'm going to move it down by step to the B. You could also move it up by step to the D. It wouldn't particularly matter, but that's how we do that. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's try the next one. Because it's, we're going to ask the same questions in each one of these. We're going to ask what key are we in, where's the seventh, where's the leading tone, and then we're going to go for it with resolving our chord. So first thing we're going to ask about number 2 is what key is it in? 3 flats says it could be in E flat major or it could be in C minor. So we're going to look at that chord, which we know is a 5/7 chord, and figure it out. And that chord is a G, B, D, F chord. So G is the root. And if G is the root of a 5 chord, well, the key you're in when G is the 5th note of the scale is C. So we're in C minor here. That's a root position 5/7 chord in the key of C minor. And of course, the other thing that would make us think C minor and not E major, E flat major, is that B natural. You don't want to write B natural and E flat major as a note in the scale. But in C minor, B natural is the leading tone of the scale. It's a good note to do. It's the raised 7th. Okay, so we've got our 5/7 chord set up. First order of business, find the 7th of the chord. G, B, D, F. It's the F. It's in the tenor voice. So find that chord 7th and resolve it down by steps. We're going to take that F in the tenor down by step to the E flat in the 1 chord. And then look for the leading tone. In C, the leading tone is B natural. And here the B natural stuck in the soprano voice. It's exposed again. It's in the outer voice. So we're going to make sure to resolve that B natural in the soprano up by a half step to C. And then we just do stuff that doesn't cause a ruckus. Let's keep both chords in root position, so we'll take the bass from G up to C in the 1 chord, and then we just need to find something for the alto to do that doesn't disrupt things. Now I've got C and E flat. Resist the temptation to put the alto on G. If you do, you're going to get parallel fifths with the bass. So what we're going to do is we're going to write an incomplete 1 chord, and we're going to move the alto by step. Down to middle C makes sense. If you went up to E flat, we could live with that. But essentially this one is exactly like the last homework we did, where if you have a complete 5/7 chord in root position, then if you resolve the leading tone and the 7th, you can't have a complete 1 chord. We have to leave something out, and it's always easiest to leave the 5th out. Okay, look at number 3. I've got 4 sharps in the key signature, and the chord is B, D sharp, F sharp, A. That would be a 5/7 chord in the key of E major, not C sharp minor, E major. And it's a root position 5/7 chord. First thing you want to do, resolve your 7th. And in B, D sharp, F sharp, A, the 7th is the A. It's in the alto voice, so let's move it down by step to G sharp. And then the leading tone in the key of E major is D sharp. I can see that's in the soprano voice, so if it's a leading tone in the soprano or the bass voice, we need to resolve it. So let's resolve it up a half step to E. And then we'll keep our chords in root position, so that means the bass is going to jump from B to E. And the tenor needs to just do something in the E major chord at the end there. And again, don't put the tenor on B. That's going to create consecutive fifths with the bass. Basically parallel fifths that happen in contrary motion. So what we're going to do is we're going to write another incomplete 1 chord. We're going to take the tenor's F sharp and we're going to move it down by step to E, and we'll have 3 roots and a third in our 1 chord. And let's try number 4. 5 flats, so it's D flat major or it's B flat minor, and that A natural in the chord says B flat minor because that A natural is the leading tone. It's an F, A, C, E flat chord. So F is the root, and of course F is the fifth in the key of B flat. So this is a 5-7 chord that we want to take to a 1 chord in B flat minor. And in this F, A, C, E flat chord, the A is in the bass. It's an inverted chord, so it's a 5-6-5 chord that we want to take to 1. And when we go to do this, I suggest the first thing we do is resolve the 7th. So in an F, A, C, E flat chord, E flat's the 7th. Looks like it's in the tenor voice, so we're going to take it and move it down by step to a D flat. The leading tone in B flat minor is A, and it's in an outer voice. It's in the bass, so we need to resolve that leading tone in the bass up a half step to B flat. And then in the soprano and the alto, we're just going to do whatever doesn't cause trouble in the form of parallel fifths or voice spacing or anything like that. The thing that it makes sense to do with the alto is what? Keep it as a common tone, because we're going F, A, C, E flat to B, D, F. So let's just keep the F in our alto voice. And with the soprano, you might choose to move down by step to B flat. That gets a nice complete 1 chord with the root doubled. Although really, the soprano could kind of do anything it wanted to there. The soprano could have gone up by a step to D flat instead, or even the soprano could have gone to F, the high F, and it wouldn't get too far away from the alto, or it could have gone down to the alto's low F. So there are a lot of choices we could have made there. There's very seldom just one way to write these things that's correct. As long as you're resolving sevenths and leading tones, you've probably got a little bit of latitude with what you can do with the other voices. Okay, let's move on to the next stuff. So on this slide, we're going to continue. And our first chord there has a B and a C sharp and a G sharp and an E sharp. So that's going to be a C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, B chord when you figure out what the root is. C sharp is the root of the chord. And the key signature says we could be in A major or we could be in F sharp minor. Well, the fact that C sharp is the root of that chord and it's 5-7, and the fact that the chord has E sharp, which is F sharp minor's leading tone, lets us know we need to analyze number 5 here in F sharp minor. And notice our 5 chord is not in root position. It's C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, B, and the B's on the bottom. So it's in third inversion, which means we're going to write 5-4-2. And then we're going to resolve it to a tonic chord. And this one's going to get kind of interesting. Let's do what we've been doing. Let's resolve the 7th of the chord first. So what's the 7th of a C, E, G, B chord? It's the B. And where's the B in this case? It's in the bass. So we're going to take that 7th that's in the bass and we're going to resolve it down a step to an A. Now that's going to be something interesting because in that last 1 chord, it's going to be an F sharp, A, C sharp chord. And the bass is going to be on A, which is the 3rd of the chord. So that means that I'm actually not just going to go to a 1 chord, I'm going to go to a first inversion chord, a 1-6 chord. And the reason why that must be the case is because the chord before it was in 3rd inversion with the 7th in the bass, so we have to resolve the 7th down a step, which means when we go to the 1 chord, the 7th is going to be on the 3rd of the chord. You're going to notice this a lot. Anytime your Roman numeral has 4-2 after it, it's going to probably be the case that the next chord is going to be a first inversion chord and is going to have a 6 or a 6-5 after it. 3rd inversion almost always goes to first inversion. So be aware of that. And be aware that we always resolve the 7th down by a step, even when it's in the bass. Now the other thing we might want to think about is the leading tone. If it's in an outer voice, we need to do something about that. And in F sharp minor, the leading tone is E sharp. And sure enough, it's in an outer voice. It's in the soprano. So that E sharp in the soprano needs to go up a half step to F sharp. And then the inner voices, the alto and the tenor, we're just going to move them in such a way that they don't cause trouble. Now the best thing to do is look for a common tone. Is there a common tone between a C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, B chord and an F sharp, A sharp, F sharp, A, C sharp chord? And there is. It's the C sharp. So let's keep that common tone. It's in the tenor. So we're just going to keep the tenor on C sharp. And then the alto, we're going to move somewhere, probably by step would be best. I would suggest moving the alto down by step to the F sharp, but if you took it up by step to the A, that would not be incorrect. They both work. But yeah, watch for this third inversion thing because it's gonna happen a lot. Third inversion is usually followed by first inversion. So let's look at the second one. One flat says F major or D minor, and a chord with C sharp in it, which is D minor's leading tone, says we're in D minor. So that's a 5-7 chord in D minor, and a 5-7 chord in D minor is A, C sharp, E, G. And if you look at this one, you'll notice that in the A, C sharp, E, G chord, E is in the bass, so it's inverted. Which inversion is it in if it's A, C sharp, E, G? It's in second inversion. So I'm going to write my Roman numeral to show that it's a second inversion 5 chord. 5, 4, 3. And we're going to take it to a 1 chord. And the most important thing is resolve the chord's 7th. So in an A, C sharp, E, G chord, which notes the 7th, it's the G. Where's the G? It's in the tenor. So we're going to take that G in the tenor and move it down by step to an F. And then we're going to look at the leading tone. And if it's in an outer voice, we're going to definitely resolve it. And the leading tone in D minor is C sharp. And it's in an outer voice. It's in the soprano. So we're definitely going to resolve that C sharp in the soprano up a half step to D. I would recommend looking for common tones. And the common tone between a 5 chord and a 1 chord in D minor is A. And I see an A in the alto, so let's keep the A in the alto. And now it's just a matter of figuring out something nice to do with the bass voice. Let's move it by step to the root of the 1 chord. If you moved it up a step to the F, it wouldn't be wrong, but it would mean that your 1 chord was now a 1-6 chord. But the most important thing is resolving the 7th. And the second most important thing is resolving the leading tone if it needs it because it's in an outer voice. Let's look at the third example on this line. In this example, we've got 6 sharps in the key signature. So it's F sharp major, or it's D sharp minor. Y'all can thank me later for that. And if you look at the chord, you realize it's A sharp, C double sharp, E sharp, G sharp. A sharp is the root. A sharp is the 5th note in D sharp minor. Also, that C double sharp would be the leading tone in D sharp minor. So let's analyze in D sharp minor. And notice that in the A, C, E, G chord, the C is the bass. So we're in first inversion. So we're going to write 5, 6, 5 and resolve it to 1. First order of business, resolve the 7th. The 7th of an A sharp, C double sharp, E sharp, G sharp chord is G sharp. It's in the soprano. So we're going to take that G sharp in the soprano and take it down by step to F sharp. The leading tone in D sharp minor is C double sharp. It's in the outer voice, the bass voice, so we make sure we resolve it since it sticks out, and we resolve it up a half step to D sharp. And then with the alto and the tenor, we do things that don't wreck all the good work we've done thus far. Are there common tones between a D sharp minor 5-7 chord and a D sharp minor 1 chord? There is one. It's the A sharp. That's in the tenor, so we'll keep it. And in the alto, we should move by step either up to F sharp or down by step to D sharp. And for the last one on this line, we have two sharps in the key signature, so it could be D major, it could be B minor. The chord is A, C sharp, E, G, and the A would be the fifth note in the key of D major. So this is in D major. It's a 5-7 chord in D major. But notice it's A, C sharp, E, G, and the G is the bass note. So it's an inverted 5 chord. So it's going to be a third inversion 5 chord. So it's 5, 4, 2, and it's going to resolve to 1. And remember the thing that happened at the beginning of this line when we had a 4-2 chord? The 7th was in the bass, so we had to resolve the 7th down by step. And when we did that, that meant that our 1 chord, D, F sharp, A, had the 3rd in the bass, so it became a 1-6 chord. It's that thing I said about a third inversion chord is almost always going to be followed by a first inversion chord. Here it is happening again. Because we did the most important thing part writing wise. We resolved the 7th of the chord down by step. And now we're just going to write whatever else is missing from our D, F sharp, A chord. Let's look at the soprano. See what note's in the soprano in the 5 chord? It's C sharp. And what's the deal with C sharp in the key of D? Oh yeah, it's the leading tone. So we need to make sure we resolve that C sharp up to D because it's an outer voice leading tone. Then look at the alto voice. It's on A in the first chord. And in the first chord we have A, C sharp, E, G. And in the second chord we're going to have D and F sharp and A. So what's the smart thing to do with the alto? Keep it on A. Hold that common tone. And with the tenor voice, you could move down by step to D, and that would get you what you need. If you wanted, you could even try something like going up by step to F sharp. That wouldn't be awful. Or even, the tenor could have done anything. The tenor could have come down to the A, and it wouldn't mess up the spacing or anything. But moving by step is always smoothest. So I like a stepwise resolution for the tenor. Okay, in number 9, we're seeing something we haven't seen before. If you look at that chord, I see a B flat and an A flat and a D and another B flat. This chord doesn't have a 5th. It should be a B flat, D, F, A flat chord, but the F isn't there. Instead, there are 2 B flats. Not a big deal. Chords can go without 5ths. So what we're looking at is a 5-7 chord in the key of E flat major. Let's resolve it to a 1 chord. And let's resolve the 7th first. So what's the 7th in that 5-7 chord? It's the A flat. It's in the tenor. Take it down by step to the G. And then, what's the leading tone in this chord? The leading tone in this chord is D, because we're in E flat major. This is one of those times where we don't really have to resolve the leading tone, because look where that D is. It's in the alto voice. So we might decide that this is one of those times when the leading tone doesn't need to resolve up a half step to E flat. We could resolve that D in the alto voice instead somewhere else, because I'm probably going to take my bass voice and take it to E flat to keep both chords in root position. Like that. Okay, so there's an E flat, there's a G. There's a B flat in the soprano, there's a D in the alto. Well, the B flat in the soprano is in both notes, in both chords, so I should probably hold it as a common tone. And when I'm trying to figure out what to do with the alto's on the leading tone. It does not have to go to E flat. It might make sense to do that, just because then, it certainly doesn't hurt and the chord is complete. But if I wanted, I could have taken that D in the alto down to a B flat, and that wouldn't have been an awful tragedy. Could have even taken it up to the G. There are lots of good choices there. Number 10, we're in C major. Could have been A minor, could have been C major. Since the chord is G, B, D, F, that's 5, 7, and C. Also, you'll notice there's no leading tone in A minor. So we're in C major. It's a G, B, D, F chord, and the F is in the bass. So it's a 5-4-2 chord. And remember the thing about 4-2 chords, third inversion chords? They tend to go to first inversion chords. And that's because the seventh of the chord is in the bass. That F in the bass is the chord seventh, so it needs to go down a step to an E. And then look in the soprano. It's on B. That's the leading tone in C major. So that soprano B needs to go up to C to resolve the leading tone. Look at the tenor and think about what a good thing for the tenor to do might be. Going from a G, B, D, F chord to a C, E, G chord. G, B, D, F to C, E, G. See what the tenor could do? Keep that common tone G throughout. And then the alto sort of gets to do whatever doesn't make waves. Move down by step to C is good. Of course, the alto could have also stepped up to an E or gone to a G. As long as it was the upper G and not the lower G that got it too far away from the soprano, we would be fine. And the next chord is a 5-4-3 chord in the key of C sharp minor, right? Because if you look, it's G sharp, B sharp, D sharp, F sharp. The D sharp's in the bass, so it's a second inversion 5 chord, 5-4-3. When we go to resolve it to a 1 chord, let's make sure we move the seventh of the 5-4-3 chord down a step. The 5-4-3 chord is G, B, D, F, so that F in the upper top, in the upper voice, in the soprano is the seventh. So it needs to go down by step to an E. And if I'm in C sharp minor, the leading tone's B sharp. I see there's a B sharp in the tenor voice, so it's one of those leading tones that doesn't have to resolve up by a half step. It might or it might not. I probably do want to keep the chord in root position, so I should probably take the D in the bass voice down to C sharp. With the alto is a good common tone between the two chords, so I should hold that. And then you could either resolve the tenor leading tone of B sharp up a half step to C sharp or not. There it is leaping down to G sharp just to show that it can do that, but it could also have gone up to C sharp just fine. And the other thing that could have happened that those little small notes are showing is that the alto voice G sharp could have chosen to come down to an E instead rather than holding a common tone. I always think holding common tones is good though. The non-negotiable in this chord, of course, is you need to make sure that that F sharp in the soprano that's the seventh resolves down by step. That's what we want to always make sure we don't make an exception to. Other things we might have leeway, but not how we resolve a chord seventh. All right, the last chord in the line is either an A flat major or F minor. And once we realize it's an E flat, G, B flat, D flat chord, we realize, well, that would be 5-7 in A flat major. And this E flat, G, B flat, D flat chord has the G as the bass note. It's in first inversion, so it's 5-6-5. So when we go to resolve, let's watch first about our seventh. The seventh of an E, G, B, D chord it's that D, the D flat. In the tenor voice, it needs to go down a step to C. So we'll do that. And now we'll think about the leading tone. The leading tone in A flat major is G. And here I see the G is in the bass voice and outer voice, so we got to be careful. We got to make sure we resolve that leading tone up a step to tonic, which makes sense anyway because that gets us a root position 1 chord. And with our last steps in the upper voices here, look and see if there's a common tone between the 5 chord and the 1 chord. There is. It's the E flat and the soprano, so hold that over. And in the alto voice, move probably by step to something in the A flat chord. I like the A flat. Could have stepped up to the C, could have jumped down to the E flat. A flat made good sense too though, so why not do what works best? And that's all the part writing. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you all are getting a feeling for how once we allow the 5 chord to be an inversion, sometimes things are a little bit easier. Notice we didn't have nearly as many incomplete 1 chords without the 5th in them, because when the chord's an inversion, it's a little bit easier to get a complete chord when we resolve. So should we talk about this harmonic analysis? That's the second part of the assignment. And it's like most of the harmonic analysis we do. Put the chords on the top as pop chords, put the chords on the bottom as Roman numerals with figured bass. And if there are non-chord tones, circle those and label those. And remember, whenever there's a second inversion triad, a 6/4 chord, you got to label it. Tell me whether it's cadential or passing or whatever. So the first thing we'd want to do if we're going to harmonically analyze this little chord progression is we would want to figure out which key should we analyze in, because each one has 2 possibilities for the major or the relative minor. So this is in D major or it's in B minor. And in looking at it, to determine that, I might want to do a few things. Like I might want to look and see if I can see those notes that we would need to change in a minor key. We can raise the 7th note, we can raise the 6th note. So if I was in B minor, that means that I might use G and A from the key signature, or I might choose to raise them up and use G sharp and A sharp. So one thing to do is look and see if we see that. And if we don't see that, that's an indicator that we might be in the major key instead. You could do it in B minor without A sharp and G sharp. Most people with names like Mozart and stuff like that wouldn't do it, at least not without the A sharp, but you could. So let's look at other things. Other things to look at are look at important moments in the music. Like look at how it starts and look at how it stops. And look in particular at the chords there. Because a lot of times tonic harmony gets set up early in a progression so that we can get a sense of what the key is. And I see that this starts on a D major chord. And I see that this ends on a D major chord. That sort of gives some good weight to it being in D major. And the other thing we should do that requires a little bit more work too is look at the cadence. Because the way it ends is going to have to be one of those cadences we talk about, authentic or plagal or half or deceptive. So if I look at this, I can like find that there would be cadences that made sense in D major that didn't make sense in B minor. And we'll talk more specifically about what those cadential ideas are as we get on down through the piece. But let's go ahead and start analyzing in D major. That'll be fun. So the first measure, we've already said the first chord's a 1 chord. The second chord, I see E's in the bass clef, and I see an A and a C sharp in the treble clef. If I wanted to try to make something out of that, I could figure out that that could be stacked as an A, C sharp, E chord, as a 5 chord in the key of D major. And it's A, C sharp, E with E in the bass, the 5th in the bass, so I'm going to call it 5, 6, 4. And then the chord at the end of the measure is a D, F sharp, A chord again, but the F sharp's in the bass. It's a 1 chord in first inversion, a 1, 6. So that's what my first measure is going to look like. And you don't want to stop there, because notice the second chord's a 6/4 chord. So it's not completely analyzed until we decide what type of 6/4 chord is it. Well, you look at the bass line, it's going D, E, F sharp. We're approaching that 6/4 chord by step, and we're leaving its bass note by step in the same direction. That's how passing 6/4 chords go. And in fact, if you look at everything going on in the measure, you'll see all the elements of that little bass goes up or goes down, common tone, neighbor tone. You'll see all that set up in that measure. The little bass goes up line is in the bass voice. The little or goes down is in the tenor voice. The common tone, of course, is the alto. And then look at the soprano doing that lower neighbor motion of D, C sharp, D. So there's our little passing 6/4 progression with the passing 6/4 song that'll never lead you wrong. That brings us to the second measure, where the chord that starts the second measure has G and E and A and C sharp. And when you figure out how would that stack as a root third, fifth, maybe seventh chord, it's A, C sharp, E, G. It is a seventh chord. And it's built on 5, so it's 5-7, but it's 5-7 with seventh in the bass. So it's 5-4-2, and the chord at the end of the measure is a 1 chord in first inversion, which, is another illustration of that thing I was telling y'all when we were doing the part writing about how third inversion chords tend to wind up on first inversion chords because that's where they're most happy when they resolve that seventh in the bass down a step. And that's what's happening when the bass goes from G down to F sharp there. That's the seventh of the A7 chord moving down by step into the third of the D chord. And now we're in measure 3 and the first chord that's going to bother everybody. Because on beat 1 there's an A and an E and a D. And there's not really any good way to stack those into a triad because they're not all, it's not possible to get all those notes a third apart. And that's because one of them doesn't belong. And the one that doesn't belong is the D at the beginning of the measure there. The note that's actually part of that chord is the C sharp on beat 2. The chord on beat 2 is A, C sharp, E with E in the bass. It's a 5-6-4 chord, and then the chord at the end of the measure is a root position D, F sharp, A chord. So that D at the beginning of the measure is a non-chord tone. A non-chord tone that got held over from the previous chord and resolved down by a step. That sounds like a suspension. And that's what it is. It's a suspension. And suspensions like to mess up our figured bass too because we're supposed to show them. So we're going to want to write our figured bass so that there are numbers telling me what's that D to C sharp look like. That is a passing 6-4 chord, by the way, before we go on to figuring out how to notate the suspension. But it's passing because, again, you can see the bass note in the 6-4 chords approached by step from F sharp and left by step in the same direction down to D. That's the or goes down of the passing 6-4 chord progression. And there's the common tone in the alto. It's on A all the way through there. If you look at the tenor, it's the voice that reverses the bass voice. While the bass goes F, E, D, the tenor goes D, E, F. And the soprano's that neighbor tone motion again, D, C sharp, D. But let's talk about that suspension. The suspension is a 7-6 suspension because remember we measure suspension notes not from chord roots. The root of that chord's A. But we measure the suspension from the bass note, and the bass note of that chord's E. So how far is it from an E up to a D? That's a seventh. And when that D went down to C sharp and the E was still in the bass, how far is it from E up to C sharp? That's a sixth. So we put the 7-6 there to show what our suspension is. And what it really does is it delays the sixth in that 5-6-4 chord. Does that make sense? I'm going to pretend that it does. Okay, so that brings us to the last two measures, and we know it's a root position 1 chord at the beginning. And I've gone ahead and put the pop chord symbols in. If that 5-7 went to the 1 chord at the beginning of that second to last measure and we were done, then we could say that was an authentic cadence. But it looks like there's a little bit more music going on still in those last two measures because there's a G chord with a D in the bass on beat 3, and then there's a 1 chord in the last measure. And when we go through Roman numerals on it, we get a 1 and a 4-6-4 and a 1. And since there's another 6-4 chord, we need to figure out which type is it. We've had a lot of passing 6-4 chords, but that's not one of those because, remember in a passing 6-4 chord, you approach the bass note by step and you also leave it by step. And we certainly haven't done that here at all. In fact, that bass note's giving us some clues about what type of 6-4 chord it is. Notice the bass note's the same before and after the 6-4 chord. It just sounds all the way through like a pedal tone. And this is a pedal 6-4 chord. Or a neighbor 6-4 chord. You could call it either one. If you call it a neighbor 6-4 chord, then you'd want to look and make sure you had the upper voices doing what they need to do as well. And you do. Look at the alto. It goes F sharp, G, F sharp, like upper neighbor tones, up a step and back down. And then the tenor voice goes A, B, A, like upper neighbor tones. So you could call it either a neighbor 6/4 chord or a pedal 6/4 chord. They're both fine. And since the passage ends with a 4 chord going to a 1 chord, this is a plagal cadence. I don't think I asked y'all for that, but doesn't hurt to know that, right? Okay, and on that note, I think we're done on this. That gets you through the homework, which means no homework this weekend. You're welcome. So for Monday, we're going to continue on the 7th chord chapter. We're going to write some 7th chords that aren't 5/7 chords too. But like I say, for this weekend, there's no homework. Just, take it easy. Go over these assignments again if you need to make sure that you understand how we got the answers we got in assignment 2. If you haven't turned in assignment 1 yet, go ahead and get that done and send it to me. And on Monday, we'll pick up with new stuff. So make sure you've read in chapter 12 up through the part about dominant 7th chords, and we'll do the next thing on Monday. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and sane with clean washed hands, and I will see you Monday. Goodbye.